Well, welcome. I'm so pleased to welcome Lana Pollock into our ongoing conversations. It would actually take me most of this conversation just to go through all of her accomplishments and leadership positions in the environmental field and beyond in her career, but I want to provide at least a few highlights. Most recently, Lana was the chair of the U.S. section of the International Joint Commission, and that is the binational commission that is charged with advising Canada and the U.S. government on matters relating primarily to their shared waters, but also to other things like that. As we heard previously from Conan Smith, Lana was also served 12 years as president of the Michigan Environmental Council, which is a coalition of organizations determined to protect the Great Lakes and Michigan's environment. Prior to that, Lana served 3 terms as a state senator and was a leading advocate for women, children, and the environment in particular. And also, Lana was a fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, taught at the University of Michigan, and was locally elected to the Ann Arbor Board of Education. And she has served on many educational, nonprofit, and corporate boards and still does that today. So pleased to have you with me today, Lana.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Professor.
I want to start by asking you, sort of given the long and diverse career that you've had, who are some of your biggest leadership influences? On whose shoulders do you most stand?
Well, by chance, I just had an opportunity to see a Broadway show called SUFs. That's short for suffragists.
Okay.
Not suffragettes, as they made the point, but suffragists. The name was changed by those who wanted them to be cute rather than important. But the suffragists fight from 1913, which is even as old as I am, before my time, to 1921, when they got the right to vote. I was reminded over and over how we all stand on somebody's shoulders, the suffering, the determination. These people went to prison and were actually waterboarded. So I clearly stand on the generations of women who fought for just respect and recognition in the legal sense that was always denied to women. That's one. You get a little closer, there's Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring. And it's not just that she was a scientist. I think all my heroes combine expertise with determination, with bravery, with a sense of determination to make change, commitment to change. So Rachel Carson, that was written when I was just getting out of high school. She had a fight to even get it published. I wasn't aware of all of that at the time, but I did become introduced to the message of Silent Spring, which is the loss of life on the planet from polluting the air, specifically in that case mostly DDT. And we were losing the birds, we were losing the insects, we were losing the ecology. It's another, and if you get closer, there were people in my lives. There was Conan Smith's grandfather, Al Wheeler. He was the mayor of the city of Ann Arbor, the first and I believe only black mayor and a professor at the University of Michigan. And he was so strong in his there was determination and respect. So it was the way he dealt with challenges, political challenges, interpersonal challenges. It was his integrity. And at the time, although I was chair of the local Democratic Party, which is why I was interacting with him as much as I was, I want to stress that I had no idea of what I would or could do in the future. I did not have role models that were specific to what became my roles and my ambitions until later. When I was on the school board, there were 2 Kathys in my life. One was Kathy Dannemiller. She was a professional woman. She was the chair of the board, the school board. I was a member of the school board. We were both elected district-wide. And she was the first professional woman. She had a profession outside of her home life. Believe it or not, I'd never worked with a professional woman before. And I was, at that point, close to 40. I was in my upper 30s. So just seeing a woman in that role, another woman at the same time in my life, and I had to be ready to be open to these women. There was another Kathy. That was Kathleen Strauss, who later became, for several years, the chair of the Michigan Board of Education. So she was eventually elected statewide. At that point, she was working with the School Board Association. Seeing two women, somewhat older than I, professional, confident, capable, it changed my life, and it also changed my recognition of the importance of role models. And a role model, I know, can be somebody who doesn't look like you, maybe a different gender or different in race or any other way. But to me, seeing women in doing such a good job in roles that I thought were very important, that changed.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about your role in lifting up some of the women leaders of today, the affectionately often referred to as the Lana Mafia, some of my best friends and colleagues in the field. And I'd like to hear a little bit about sort of your strategy in lifting that up. And I was intrigued too that you linked it back to Rachel Carson, one of my personal heroes. I had the opportunity earlier in my career to sit on the board of the Rachel Carson Homestead, which is where she's from, and I was living in Pittsburgh, which is her hometown at the time, and just delving into her career in times at a time of great challenges, particularly for women leaders. This is at the early 60s.
That's right.
But yeah, I'd love for you to comment on some of the role that you've had in lifting up women, particularly earlier in their careers. I know you've done a lot of that work.
Well, you mentioned, Rachel Carson's period of history, just before mine. I think that timing is really important in one's life, and for those who had the opportunity to have role models in ways that I didn't, which is, in this case, I'm saying women in professions that I might identify with, women in roles. It gave me the idea that I belonged, or I could belong, I could do something. So I don't think even with that recognition, I don't think I set out to be a role model for anybody, or set out to be men or women, largely, mostly younger than I, when you say the Lana Mafia. I just was delighted to work with bright, young people. And I don't think that Al Wheeler, for instance, who was a generation older than I, different gender, different race, but he treated me with respect. He was open to me. He was available to me. I watched him. I saw how he handled problems, challenges, resolved things, dealt with heavy, heavy criticism, some of it very unfair, some of it just legitimate different opinions. I think that I was lucky to work with so many people who then went on to run for office, serve in office, be public servants. I think they just picked up on my enthusiasm. I'd like to say integrity. I mean, my father told me as a child, Lana, if you tell the truth, it's easier to remember what you've said.
That's good advice.
It was good advice, and I don't know. We just got along.
And I guess that leads me to the next question, which are in this course we're talking about environmental leadership, sustainability leadership, some of the common traits. What are some of the things that you saw in folks, or what are some of the things that you believe are common traits for strong environmental leaders, for effective environmental leaders?
I think integrity is at the heart of almost everything. Every good public servant. There are some who get to be powerful that I can think of who lack integrity. That's a shame. They're not usually on our side. They're not usually on the side of protecting the planet, protecting life on the planet, respecting the people on the planet. If people have to speak truth to power, they do. And I think that if they can free themselves at a young age, and I'll tell you a story, if they can free themselves at a young age from an overabundance of peer pressure, they can go on to live a life that has so much more freedom. We all want freedom, than those who are still bound by peer pressure. And I learned very young that it was okay to be different. A story that I didn't think of for many, many, many years, but it came back to me as an adult, clear as a bell. I remember being outside on my grade school playground. It was early December. It was cold. I grew up in Ludington, Michigan, on Lake Michigan, an influence in my life too. It was cold, and I was outside at recess, and I was looking at the windows of the school, and the Christmas decorations were going up everywhere. I was nervous. My kindergarten teacher was asking children about the Christmas trees that their parents had. Do you have your Christmas tree? Have you decorated your Christmas tree? What's your favorite ornament? And I thought, well, what if she asks me? We don't have a Christmas tree. We're Jewish. And I was just so nervous as a little girl. And I remember going home, I talked to my mother, I asked her if we could have a Christmas tree, and she was very gentle and very firm and very respectful. 3 important elements. That Christmas trees are a lovely tradition, but they're not our tradition. It's not our holiday. You can visit your friend and your best friend, and I know that her mother will let you decorate their Christmas tree. So it was respect for others, respect for self. Next year, I remember being on that same playground, same time. It was cold. The Christmas decorations were going up in the school. And I remember thinking, wasn't I silly when I was little? No, I was 6 years old instead of 5 years old. Uh-huh. Wasn't I silly when I was little? I thought you had to be like everybody else all the time. That was a lesson that I learned, and it freed me. And I think that it may be that others have picked up on that sense of freedom and thought that they too could express and celebrate their own belonging to whomever they were, with respect.
I wanted to turn our conversation a little bit to one of the things that actually Conan mentioned about you, which is an ability to speak truth to power. He told a story particularly about your conversations with the previous governor, but I think there's dozens and dozens of people that could all these stories. And the learners in this course just watched a video about how we can turn climate anxiety into action. Because we're all feeling, well, I'll make an assumption here that anyone that's paying attention is feeling anxiety about environmental issues and climate. Yet, you know, one of the things that I've noticed in my long interactions with you is the ability to both acknowledge the realities of what's going on, but also channel that into positive action and not get overwhelmed with sort of the grief elements of the losses going on. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you can reflect a little bit about that in your career and how you've managed to both acknowledge the realities that are happening, but also stay positive and forward facing, which is, I think, a big challenge for environmental leaders, you know, new and seasoned.
Well, I'll tell you this, I've learned to be a good loser because I've had so much practice. You start out with, big picture. I was helped also, I want to say, by living with a scientist. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a politician who cares a lot. But I respect the importance of science. So you start with the science, you understand what needs to be done, and you go for it. You go for it with as much respect, and this is hard, as possible, with in a legislature that has different opinions, different parties, different people. You go with as much respect as possible, because if you don't respect somebody, they'll never listen to you. So really try hard to focus on what you have in common, and that's a challenge sometimes with people that are really going at you. You go for as much as you can get, and know that you're going to get more if you keep at it. If you quit the first time you lose an election, if you quit the first time you lose a vote on the floor of the Senate, if you quit the first time that somebody speaks untruthfully about you, and you're just disgusted because it's not fair, well, you don't live to fight another day. And I think the success in difficult problems just takes staying power.
Staying power and kind of the long-term perspective.
And I think that also reframing is an important part of what I do, and it for whatever reason it seems to be pretty well embedded. I'm a glass half full person. Well, let me put it this way. My husband, the scientist, and he's actually a climate scientist.
Not just a climate scientist, a Nobel-winning one.
Well, along with a lot of other people who worked with, again, things don't happen solo. They happen, the bigger the crowd, the better the result, if people within that crowd can listen to each other. But at any rate, he said to me, because I was the politician, he's the scientist, and he said, Lana, we're going to get the science right a lot sooner than we'll get the politics right. And he's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right where we're at.
Because we understand what needs to be done. There's really more to learn, but about how to do it, but not what needs doing. We've known for a long time what needs doing. We really need to free ourselves from the dependency on carbon fuels. But to get back to your question, I'm just a reframer. I look for, somebody said about Ronald Reagan. Now, some people might not say I had too much in common with Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan used to look for the pony if he saw a pile of manure. There's a pile of manure. Oh, there must be a pony here. How wonderful.
I've never heard that analogy. It's good.
And I think that there's some of that in me. In fact, it's deep within me, and it makes life more fun.
So one of the other things that the learners in this course, and one of our key themes, is drawing from indigenous knowledge. And learners have just watched a video from a Maori scholar and activist and leadership scholar that is basically saying we need to go slow to go far. Right? And when times get tough, in particular, we need to kind of slow down, and that indigenous knowledge is really key to solving, and I'll put that in quotes, our environmental problems. And I guess I'm wondering if you've got reflections in your career about how indigenous knowledge and leaders have impacted you in some of the decision making and relationships over time. And I know at the IGC, the International Joint Commission in particular, there's a lot of focus on traditional, ecological, and indigenous knowledge.
I think there is growing respect for what we've missed and what we've done that has been so horrible to indigenous peoples. But as we recognize some of the uglier parts of our history here and in Australia and around the world, we're learning not just what we've done, but what we missed in terms of knowledge and how to live with the world instead of on the planet. But I have to say, it's only in recent years that I've had the benefit of that, because I'm a child of the 50s and the 60s. And in the 60s, when I was in college and beginning to explore the interests that I have today, in the 60s, there were still boarding schools where indigenous people were being wrenched out of their families and out of their cultures and thrown into terrible situations. So I didn't come of age in a time with much respect for indigenous knowledge, but I've gained it, or I am gaining it over time. And I have had some experience working with people who are indigenous and bring that knowledge into my life, but I don't want to say far too many. But at the IJC, the International Joint Commission, Canada, whose history is, believe me, no prettier than ours in terms of indigenous European relationships, but Canada now has had an indigenous person on their among the three commissioners. There's an indigenous person. There's a second person there who's not indigenous but worked professionally with in her professional life outside, worked with indigenous peoples. Progress is being made, but it's tough, it's hard. You gotta stick with it.
One, I guess I want you to reflect back on sort of what are you most proud of in terms of your accomplishments when you sort of looking backward, and then the flip side, kind of forward looking. What would you put on the top of the environmental agenda right now? So
Okay,
a hard but two-part question.
Two-part question. Okay, so this is difficult because it's easier to credit others who deserve the credit than credit oneself. But I think that being available to younger people, and sometimes older people too, other people, when you have an impact on others, then you're lifting them up. They come with their talents, they come with their vision. By respecting them, listening to them, working with them, if I have freed them to have a sense of belonging and ambition, then I'm proud. Mm-hmm. Because no one does it in a generation, no one does it alone. So it's my best achievements, I think, are those that empower and encourage others. The single best achievement, fleeting, but I was hopeful for a second chance at this, is passage in 1990, when I was in the state senate, of the polluter pay, what's known as the polluter pay law. Michigan had the strongest, best, fairest, most effective set of legislation in the country, in the United States at that time. It said if you messed it up, you're responsible for cleaning it up.
Simple in practice, but hard to do.
That's right. Well, it's hard to.
Or simple in principle, I should say, but yeah.
Yeah, it's what's important in that is twofold, not just one. It's not just getting the money out of the people who should pay to clean it up. And we, the state of Michigan, with those laws, collected $100 million in 5 years between 1990 and 1995 to pay for cleanups. Now, $100 million is a lot of money. It was a lot more money 35 years ago, but it made a difference and it set an example. But the second thing that having accountability, which is polluter pay, basis accountability, is that it changes people's current behavior, because they know if they mess up, they're going to pay a whole lot of money. They stop taking shortcuts. They stop trying to hide the pollution in the back 40. And that makes a difference. So it's a twofer, and it's the most effective approach to legislating protection of the environment that there can be. There are people today who are children and are young people, and there's lawsuits on their behalf because they are going to live with the consequences of global warming that my generation and even your generation have foisted upon them. And there is nothing harder than passing that kind of legislation, because the perpetrators of the pollution know it works, and they fight to kill that. What happened? We worked 7 years on the polluter pay legislation. We passed it with bipartisan votes. It was even used as a tool by a Republican leader in the Senate who was running for governor, John Engler. He became governor. He did not have a good environmental record, but he wanted to have a better record so he could run on it, because environmentalism is actually popular. So politically, he wanted to join with the Democrats. Collectively, we passed that. But 5 years later, when he was governor and his party controlled the legislature, they repealed it. So it's out there waiting to be reinstated.
Yeah, and I know there's some strong action heading that way right now. And,
there is, but I try and remind Democrats and Republicans alike, liberals and conservatives alike, everybody wants a healthy environment. No one actually runs on a bad environment.
True.
They
People's
don't.
platforms here or anywhere in the world isn't, I'm in favor of destroying the environment or water. It just doesn't happen. It's
doesn't
an inherent
happen.
good.
It's a popular thing. But money talks, unfortunately, too much in politics, and power works in politics, and there are people who would rather escape responsibility and will always fight polluter pay legislation. It was a great achievement. It was done once. It can be done again. I am proud of that.
Yeah. Well, one final question then, which it would be, what's the key advice that you would have for aspiring leaders? I like to end by asking everybody this, or framed another way, what do you wish someone had told you earlier in your career that you could have used throughout?
I'm going to ask for permission to give 2 answers.
Absolutely.
Okay. First of all, environmentalists, they should banish the word regulations from their vocabulary.
So never say regulations. Okay.
Don't say regulations. Regulations that work, regulations that deserve to be on the books, I just said it for the purposes of teaching, are protections. If you think about it, in most cases, you can substitute the word protections against pollution. And that's what we need on the books. And if you look at what's referred to as regulation, if it's not protecting, get rid of it. If it's not efficient protections, if it's not effective protections, get rid of it.
So focusing on that end goal of protection, not the mechanism to get there.
No one wants to be regulated. I don't want to be regulated. You don't want to be regulated. No one wants to be regulated. But virtually everybody wants to be protected. So if we could reframe things I think that would be very helpful. My second and separate answer is I wish somebody had told me sooner, or if I had realized sooner, that I belonged. You know, I belonged in the places I wanted to be. If people think they belong, they will have the courage to participate in the work that needs to be done. I think people hold back because they wonder if they're going to be accepted. They wonder if they belong. And if they have vision and if they have desires to see a better, cleaner, healthier, safer, and saner world, they belong. You belong. Don't hesitate. You don't have to wait to be invited. I was not asked to run for office. I had to figure that I belonged, and I had to aspire to it. And I'm glad I did. I've had a great life of public service. I've had decades of it, even though I got a bit of a late start. Yeah. So people should keep in mind what they have to offer and understand that they belong.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think of that not only professionally, but personally. I have two teenage daughters, and if there's one thing that I can convey to them, it's probably that very same message, because I think it's, regardless of your aspiration or profession, it's important.
It's very much what we want to pass along to our children, and in my case, grandchildren. And there are a lot of opportunities if you see them as your opportunities.
Well, thank you so much for your time, thoughts, and leadership. I'm so pleased that I can bring to the learners in this course some of the lessons that I've learned from you over many years of interaction. And I appreciate your time and thoughts.
Thanks for having me.